current title of this paper is Why Should We Know by Heart? I can tell you with great certainty that this is not going in any published volume yet. This is definitely work in progress. If you want to find out about that, you can talk to Audrey McAllister or Hannah Molker, who's not with us. She may be joining us later. They're students who are working with me as research assistants, and we've been kind of working semi-furiously on this project, and we're getting somewhere, but not sure exactly where yet. So this is work in progress, and I just, first of all, I just love being here with you. This is my pastor's here, and he comes up in the evening service, and he just loves to preach in the evening. Wish he'd say that in the morning sometime. He never does. He's always ready to preach in the evening, and that's how I feel when I'm with colleagues and thinking about ideas. My day job doesn't give me a lot of time to do the kinds of things that we're doing here today. A couple things to keep in mind as we move through this afternoon. First is, if there was a soundtrack running in the background of this work, it's the chapter in Orality and Literacy on the psychodynamics of orality. Right? So the profound impact that Ong has had on my thinking in terms of memory, and especially what we sometimes talk about as oral memory, but we can also think about as internal personal memory, is incredibly helpful and very influential, even though I'm not going to be talking about Ong much until the end of the paper. The second thing is that I want you to remember that we're living in a context today where there's a well-documented escalation of anxiety and indecision that manifests as an inability to make a commitment or to follow through with commitments. That is true of the absolutely most intelligent people on the planet. People like us, which is a phrase that Ong used frequently. And that kind of anxiety I'm talking about is less the clinical form and more what Elijah talked about on Mount Carmel when he said, "How long are you going to go limping back and forth between two opinions?" Mm-hmm. This is biblical anxiety. People who are going back and forth, can't come down and make a decision. The first version of this paper was presented at the Media Ecology Association in 2014 under a different title. But I want to talk you through that because it's still part of what's going on here. The question had to do with personal delegation of onboard memory to digital devices. And this paper in 2014 was relied pretty heavily on some wonderful work that all came out around 2010 by people that are close to the media ecology tradition. People like Sherry Turkle, Nicholas Carr, Douglas Rushkoff, and I have to say the name, Thomas DeZengatita, because it took me so long to learn how to say it. Right? so DeZengatita's work mediated. And the common concern that these thinkers had, and true to the media ecology tradition, come from all different kinds of disciplines. Their common concern was that digital devices were emaciating functional memory. Digital devices were emaciating functional memory. And they already understood, even though they weren't articulating exactly how, they already understood that this kind of mechanism and practice would displace personal thought and agency. That it would displace personal thought and agency, but would give the illusion of greater, stronger personal intelligence and autonomy. The way that Carr talked about that is that we feel smarter while we're getting done. So the 2014 version of this project was what should be retained in onboard memory. Because from a media ecology perspective, The analytical work like this does not say, let's change everything back. There's an understanding that these are background conditions that we don't have choices about the conditions, we have choices within them. And the other thing about the meat ecology tradition that's so important is it really tends to be constructive. Like there's analysis, there's thinking about it, but it's what are we going to do? Not what are we going to try to convince everybody is wrong. And so this question of what should we commit to for onboard memory is attempting to be a constructive question. So what should we really be working? What's worth working extra hard to retain? And in the process, I looked at Augustine's Book 10 in the Confessions on Memory as a starting point. Now, I'd like to give you the idea that because I've been studying Augustine for a long time, I had this brilliant idea. Why don't we look at Book 10 and think about memory? But not so. Maggie Jackson actually directed me this way in a book called Distracted, The Erosion of Attention and Coming Dark Age, which is also published in 2010. So I was reading Jackson's book, and she said, you know, somebody should really look at Augustine's work on memory in the Confessions. And I'm like, ding, ding, ding. Okay, good idea. I had already done quite a bit of work with Augustine, and so it was just delightful to get back in under these pretenses. And so let me just summarize a few basic tenets on memory that come out of Book 10. By the way, right now, the class I'm teaching on Monday nights, which Audrey's in, they're reading Book 10 of Confessions for Monday night. And so this is just a little preview, I guess, for them. But, number one, really strong start right out of the blocks. Memory is human action. Memory is human action. When you can't remember something, it stops you in your tracks. Okay? So you don't think about memory being part of action, but it always is. So you remember your letters, you remember your numbers, you remember how to do all kinds of things, and you're actively remembering, bringing understanding into the present through internal utterance. So memory is operationalized discursively through utterance. If you want to see something in your head, you've got to call it up. So you remember seeing the Statue of Liberty? You can't go right there. You got to think Statue of Liberty to get it there. Okay? And I don't know what language you think in. I'm stuck in English. But some of you actually think in other languages because your memory is tuned to those languages and it's faster. That's good. Okay, so memory is human action. The second major point, and I talk about this as Augustine's phenomenology of memory, because he's thinking about it as himself, and he would have a hard time with anyone else doing something besides a phenomenology of memory. You can do a brain scan, that doesn't have anything to do with memory. It's how it works and how we live it. So the second is memory is conversational. Memory is conversational. Not only is it utterance, but it's internal dialogue. You say to yourself, where did I put that? Or what is that person's first name? I know their last name. Or I know their first name. What's their last name? And we have this internal dialogue. And this is, by the way, deeply biblical. People in Scripture are always doing this. Or Jesus is accusing them of doing this. You say in your heart, right? So there's this internal conversation, and it's known and understood. So it's not just an utterance, it's a conversation and a dialogue that's going on. Third, memory is powerful. Memory is powerful. And Augustine in Book 10 uses this illustration to teach us how powerful our memory is. You can remember that you've forgotten without remembering. So, if as sometimes happens to me, I forget a name, And I'll say, I'm trying to remember this person, you know, and my wife will say, oh, so-and-so. I said, no, that's not it. I know it's not that name, but I still can't remember the name it is. Okay? And what Augustine does in the book, in this book 10, is he allows himself to let his memory run circles around him. And so it's a very interesting thing. I remember that I had forgotten. That's how powerful memory is. 4, memory is good. Memory is good and memory is a good. Why does Augustine insist on this? Memory is created by God. Memory's gift, it's a gift. It's a gift given to us by God. It is good. And it is corrupted. Memory is corrupted. Now I'm going to say something, and it's going to sound like an accusation to you, but I'm including myself in this. Memory is corrupted by self-deceit. And so, not only do I deceive myself in my conversations in my memory, but some of my memories are deceitful. Because I'm the one that's remembering them. And so there's not this pure memory available to us after the fall. Finally, Augustine talks about how memory is limited. So for example, we know we have memory. He spends several paragraphs trying to distinguish between memory and mind and fails. He doesn't end up distinguishing successfully between memory and mind. Practically speaking, if I get dementia or Alzheimer's and I can no longer remember, people might say he's lost his mind. And, you know, I have friends here who are philosophers and others who are in medicine. I'll let them make that decision. You can knock yourselves out trying to distinguish between mind and memory and brain and all those kinds of things. Thankfully, that's not what phenomenology does, and so we can continue. The problem is we know we have a memory and we know we have a mind, but we cannot understand or comprehend our memory or our mind. And so Augustine concludes in this phenomenology of memory that we act from memory. And here's the rub. Memory is essentially ethical. Now I could explain from Bakhtín's work why it must be ethical, but it's uttered and therefore it's intoned and therefore it always has an emotional charge, but it also has an ethical valence. It's always going in some direction. The problem that we have is that in the world of electronic media, memory is an inadequate metaphor and a bad analogy for data storage. It's a false metaphor. We talk about it. It's used constantly. We're not going to change the language. Don't worry. I'm not up here trying to do that. But as I know, but I can't remember it. Machine language isn't. Machine language isn't. It isn't language. So it's not analogous to human life. So when we think about what should be embedded in onward memory, we're really thinking about what should I know by heart? What should I know by heart? And as usual, we're catching up to Augustine, and we're catching up to On, and we're catching up to Postman. They're not behind the times. We're playing catch up. And so here we are in the world of AI with large language models that are promising to us more and better, more and faster and better. And I want to remind you from the media ecology tradition that Jacques Ellul has this basic maxim that the spirit of technology, which he calls la technique, is always going to say if it can be done, it must be done. If it can be done, it must be done. We have LLMs, we can do these things, we must do. And there's the expectation that there's this promise of more and faster and better, but it never delivers. It never delivers. And one of the reasons is because McLuhan makes this wonderful observation very early in understanding technology about narcosis. And so more and faster is almost always a deliverable with technology. More and faster is almost always deliverable. Better, not so much. Better, not so much. And the reason is that when the narcotic effect of technology creates numbness, the simple example is if I'm digging with my hands, I have this certain experience. If I get a shovel, I can dig more and I can dig faster, but I can't feel the can't feel the earth. This is a very important principle. If the tool that we're working on is aiding or replacing the central nervous system, it means that my mind gets numb and my memory gets numb. And so I get more and I get faster. Now, we're in a situation that Albert Borgman talks about as working through. I really like his work and how he says, look, don't complain. Don't fuss. But think about how to live. How do we make things livable? And today, what I want to do is nudge this project a little bit. And so as we look at the second part of the paper, large language models are beginning to implement delegation of all kinds of basic mental activities, not just memory. So one of the ways this manifests is that we can do more, faster, better if we just use AI to start. We just use it to start. And I don't know if you've been in these conversations. I've already been in these conversations dozens of times. So the idea is, look, I can find this. Or look, I can plan this with AI. Or look, I can start to write with AI. I can do my draft, but it isn't really me doing my draft, is it? And so if we have this sense of these kinds of things can numb our minds, what we really mean is they create vacancy and can create vacancies for us. If we agree with Augustine, and I'm not asking you to, even if I do, if you agree with Augustine that all human utterance, internal and external, is morally and ethically valenced, that means that all human utterance is working along the axis of truth and goodness and beauty. The problem is that after the fall, that axis has two sides. It has truth and goodness and beauty. It also has falsehood and evil and chaos that run alongside of it. And so one of the ideas that I'm working through that I don't have full command of, I don't know if I will, but I'm not even ready to write something detailed about it, is that we should expect that digital delegation in the LLM world is going to further vacate our virtue. We should expect our virtue to be compromised without us feeling it. We should expect it to compromise our virtue without us feeling it. So the question has shifted. I tell my students all the time, working on a project and the question moves. It moves for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it moves because you haven't been working on something for a few years. And it's shifted from what should we commit to onboard memory, which I still think is a really good question, an important educational question, to why should we learn by heart? Why should we learn by heart? In Understanding Media, Marshall McLuhan talks in the introduction about the impetus for his work being Psalm 115 and Psalm 135. And he's especially thinking about what we might refer to as the idol formula. That if I worship an idol, I become like it. And so I can't see, I can't hear, I can't touch, I can't smell. This is much more the origin of technological narcosis than some kind of psychological construct or some kind of medical construct. And so I am looking, and what has intrigued me about where this question has come from is it came first from Psalm 119, verse 11, which I will talk about from the King James Version, which is how I learned it in Vacation Bible School a long time ago. Thy word have I hid in my heart that I might not sin against thee. Okay? But newer translations, thy word have I stored up, thy word have I treasured. Right? There are a lot of good ways to think about that, but they all end up, regardless of the translation, that I might not sin against thee. And this indicates, in a very significant way, the moral depth of memory. And it's not an ecclesiastical framework. It's not just about church, and it's not just about religion. It's not just about the faith in terms of our religious way of thinking. It's about everything, because it's reinforced in Deuteronomy 17. We're in orality and literacy, right? And that Moses' directions from God to the king in Deuteronomy 17 that says, write down your own copy. Write down your own copy and read in it every day, that you might not raise yourself up over your brothers, that you maintain what we crave in ourselves and in our students, intellectual humility, intellectual generosity, that comes from knowing, from that kind of knowing things by heart. Jesus talks about it, and we hear about this from the Apostle John all the time, about abiding in the Word, and some of the papers here are dealing with those same things. Having the Word abide in us, and abiding in the Word, and having that by heart knowledge of the Word. And then the intriguing thing for orality and literacy is this tablet of the heart business. It's a recurring metaphor in Scripture. Write this on the tablet of your heart. Inscribe this on the tablet of your heart. We have some people thinking about that issue in this conference. And this is the double that intensifies it, because God says, I will write on your heart. If you think about how parents and teachers hold a child's hand to write, to learn to write, think about God inscribing things on our hearts and us inscribing the same things on our hearts. You start to think about the importance of this, the ethical valence of knowing not just Bible things, but everything by heart. And so as I think about the work of Herman Bavinck, the Dutch theologian, who talks about wanting us to work out of the thought world of Scripture, to know the thought world of Scripture, this seems like a fruitful pursuit. And so what I am doing and want to do is re-engage Augustine, not this time in Confessions, but in De Trinitate, in the second half of De Trinitate, when he talks about the human person being constituted based on memory, which he's already developed in Confessions, and understanding and will. And it's that union of memory and understanding and will that drives heart. Craig Troxell's work, With All Your Heart, is a wonderful provides wonderful insight to the fact that the holistic nature of human thought and action and being, and that being a matter of our hearts. The reason this is so important to me, and I'll conclude with this, is that knowing by heart seems to me, as an athlete, a former, I'm a has-been athlete, I sing a little better than I play now, musician, and in leadership, knowing by heart is absolutely necessary for doing good and doing well decisively at speed. And Walter Ong, in the presence of the Word, has this wonderful explanation of the moment of truth. He talks about how the moment of truth for human beings is a present moment that, like C.S. Lewis, both reflecting on Augustine, recognizes the closest approximation of contact that we have with eternity. And that in most of the important times in life, we come upon moments of truth. And they're kairotic moments. And decisions must be made. And you can't say, I need a little time to make it. All you have is what you have on board. All you have is what you know by heart. And if you're going to move quickly, you can't check your phone. You can't look it up. You can't open the spreadsheet. You can't do any of that. You've got to be able to move. And in ethical issues that require virtue, that are in moments, we've got to know by heart. I know that that's true. And it's really important for us to be able, in those moments, to make wise decisions quickly. And so that's where the project stands. There's a lot of work left to do. Thank you for enabling me to be here with you.